Welcome, Pastor Andrew Brunson.
Hello, everyone. I am very glad that I am here in this room with you rather than baking in the summer heat of a Turkish prison. So, after living in Turkey for 23 years with my wife, Noreen, our lives were turned upside down when we were arrested by the Turkish government. Noreen was released after 2 weeks, but they held on to me for 2 years. They accused me of being a spy, a terrorist, and attempting to overthrow the government. So the Turkish government knew that all of this was false, but I think they wanted to make an example of someone to intimidate other Christians, and they chose me. And eventually they tried to use me as leverage to gain concessions from the U.S., what was called hostage diplomacy. They threatened to give me 3 life sentences in solitary confinement with no possibility of parole. Now, one of my fears as a prisoner was that I would be forgotten, that nobody would speak for me. But so many in the religious freedom community made sure that this didn't happen, including a number of the groups supporting this summit. You advocated for me, you spoke for me, and as more and more people became aware of my case, and a number of people even at this summit have come up and told me that they prayed for me. As more people became aware of my case, they in turn contacted their political leaders, and this led to government engagement. Senators Tom Tillis, Jean Shaheen, James Lankford, who just spoke, they fought for me in so many ways, including shaping legislation related to Turkey. 2 commissioners from USCIRF visited me in prison. Many in Congress signed letters to Turkey's President Erdogan asking for my release. And at the highest levels of government, President Trump became personally involved and engaged often in my behalf. And eventually, he took unprecedented steps to gain my release. Vice President, I am very grateful to him. Vice President Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the list could go on. And the list would include other countries. It would include many members of the European Parliament. So no, I was not forgotten, and I am so grateful. But the reality is that very few people who are persecuted for their faith have an ending as happy as mine. Most governments that allow persecution or who engage in it themselves do not respond to statements of disapproval. They just don't care what you say about them. What they do respond to is pressure that affects them in practical ways. So the United States applied intense diplomatic pressure, and there were other countries involved as well, but there was very little movement in my case until the U.S. imposed some sanctions that affected the Turkish economy. The reality is that often, even governments that are outspoken on religious freedom hesitate to actually use the leverage that they have. And there's actually a wide spectrum of tools that they could use. So I can give you the view from the prison cell. One of the most frustrating, one of the most disheartening things for me was when Noreen would ask some government official or senator for help, and they would answer, "We are closely monitoring the situation." So I interpreted this to be a polite way of saying, we are aware, we feel for you, but we can't do anything for you. And I just wanted to yell back, yes, you can. You can do something for me. In most cases, governments can do so much more. And I think especially from those who are in positions of influence, expressions of sympathy are hollow if there's no willingness to take action. So why the lack of interest? Why the unwillingness to act? And here I especially want to underline Western governments. One reason, and I realize that there are many, but one is that money, that financial self-interest drives so many decisions. We ignore terrible abuses and persecution. It seems we'll do anything for market share. And there are many examples, including the United States, in which those who should intervene, who have the power and the leverage to intervene, often choose not to intervene. So it's ultimately a question of priorities, and increasingly one of indifference. So as a Christian who was imprisoned, the persecution of Christians is especially troubling to me. Yet while Hungary and Poland stand out as countries that have boldly spoken out against Christian persecution, I clap for them, many remain silent. Western governments who have benefited from the Judeo-Christian tradition should be especially quick to stand for oppressed Christian minority communities around the world. Instead, Western culture itself is increasingly hostile to Christianity and to faith. So this is sad to see at a time when so many persecuted believers still look to the West, especially to the United States, for help. And they look to us because America has long stood as a beacon of freedom, including religious freedom. To fulfill this role, religious freedom must be protected in the United States. We cannot promote religious freedom abroad if we lose it at home. No. So the battle to advance religious freedom is becoming more difficult. I think you see that. And yet I think that your work is so very important and pleasing to God. We should continue to advocate for the persecuted, not because we're confident that we will win in most cases. We may not. But because it is the right thing to do. The Bible says, in reference to the persecuted, remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. So as a Christian, I am especially aware that 80% of those who are persecuted in the world are Christian. This is often ignored. I want freedom of religion. I want freedom from persecution for my Christian brothers and sisters around the world. But this means that I also must seek this freedom for others, whether Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, Baha'i, whatever religion they may be. And why? Because this is the way of Jesus. He said, do to others what you would have them do to you. This is called the golden rule. It's actually the rule of love, the love for our neighbor that Jesus commanded. I want to end with encouragement. We may not often be able to move the hearts of governments, but our love and efforts for the persecuted do move the heart of God. God bless you.